Hello, my name is Dr. Stanley Lang. I want to welcome you to this page and to this video. And today I'd like to explain to you a little bit about the spiritual health component of whole person health and why I'm presenting to you a Christian worldview as the way to proceed in spiritual health. So I'd like to tell you a couple of stories to explain this more fully. Many years ago, when I was in college, I was not a Christian. I was involved in a lot of different things to try to discover my way along the path of college. Ultimately, I did become a Christian towards the end of my college years. And shortly thereafter, I met a man by the name of Abbot David, who was the abbot of a Benedictine monastery in Pecos, New Mexico. So I started to go to this monastery on a regular basis for retreats. And in a sense, Abbot David was a mentor for me, though not a close one, but somebody that I certainly looked up to for instruction and understanding the spiritual path. He was in his upper 70s by then, so he'd been walking the Christian path for a long time. And one of the things that he taught as being absolutely crucial for the monks at that monastery and for any visitors that came there was to learn how to pray the Jesus Prayer, because he felt it was the best way to grow in experiencing Jesus, but also, in a sense, the safest way to learn how to walk with Jesus as your guide. And the point that Abbot David made, and which I think is really important for us to understand even more so today, is that we really can't see the spiritual world. We can sort of sense different aspects of it, but unlike the physical world that we can easily see and sense, and all of that's why we have the senses that we have, so that we can negotiate the physical world and not only get through it, but to thrive in it and to enjoy it. Our spiritual senses are much more blunted. We don't have the ability to see clearly, and therefore we are easily fooled in spiritual matters. And many people nowadays, I think, are being fooled in even more dramatic ways than when I was in college, which that was during the hippie days, which was a pretty wild time if you want to go back into history and see some of what was going on then. But I think even now there is more spiritual deception than there was then, if that's possible. And one of the things that Abbot David basically preached to people and tried to help them to understand, which I completely internalized, is that Jesus Christ is the only reliable guide to walk into the spiritual world with. Anybody else that you go into the spiritual world with, any other entity, any other force, does not see it as clearly as Jesus. And in some cases, they are exactly opposed to the mission that Jesus has in the spiritual world. Well, if you're going to have spiritual health, obviously you want to have the best mentor possible to grow in that spiritual health. And I believe that Jesus is the best mentor possible. And that's why I emphasize the Christian worldview in terms of spiritual health. Now, I could just skip the spiritual world and talk about physical and emotional health. That would be simple, but it would be incomplete. And because it would be incomplete, I've decided not to take that step, but to include spiritual health in the understanding of whole person health. Now, when you take something and elevate it to a level of importance, automatically everything else becomes less important, let's say, or less of the thing to focus on. Now, some people get offended by that. I am not attempting to say anything negative about any other religion. What I'm trying to say is the positive about Jesus, and that he is the most reliable guide that you can have in the spiritual world. Now, you may think you're not walking through the spiritual world because you're not focusing on it. I guarantee you, you're walking through the spiritual world. The moment you have resentment or unforgiveness in your heart, you're stomping around in the spiritual world, and I haven't met anybody yet who has not dealt with that. So all of us are in the spiritual world, whether we want to be so or not, but most of us are not walking with as clear of a hold on the best guide possible. We might be Christians, but we're not walking very closely with this guide named Jesus, or we may not be Christians at all. We haven't decided who we want to follow around in the spiritual world. But if we're going to follow somebody, I think we want to follow the best guide possible. So this is the second story. It's sort of an illustration. Let's say that you're going to a jungle area that you've never been to before. It's a completely different country. You fly in to the country and you drive to this remote village to pick up a guide to go into the jungle with, because you haven't arranged that yet. And so you're walking along trying to figure out who you're going to pick as a guide. And the first place that you come to is got neon signs all lit up and flashing lights, and it looks like these folks have their marketing act together. And you go inside, and it seems like this person that they're going to give you as a guide seems to know what he or she is doing. But the more you talk about this person to them, about the details of what's actually in the spiritual world, and especially what are the danger points that we might get into, the less that they can tell you about those things, because they don't know. Now so you decide maybe you should check out some of the alternatives. So you go down to the next place that's offering guides, and you come across this shack where somebody that looks like he doesn't take care of the shack or himself very much is presenting himself as the guide that's going to take you into that forest and out again safely. And you talk to him enough to realize that you don't feel comfortable even being around this person, so why would you want to go into the jungle with this person? So you go down the path a little bit farther, and you come to this very solid little home, and it was built by the carpenter who's outside working. It's trim, it's well done, and you speak to the carpenter, who happens to do guide service as an additional source of income. And you ask him about his abilities as a guide and what his experiences have been, and you discover that he's been doing this for many decades, and he knows exactly, as you talk to him, he knows exactly where the pitfalls are, the danger spots are, and he's free to tell you. He said even if you don't hire him, he's happy to tell you, you need to avoid this place, you need to avoid that place. This place would be a nice place to go look at, but whoever takes you in there, be sure you avoid this place and that place, because those are dangerous places to be. And you realize in your heart, this person knows that jungle. That person is the guide that I want. And so you hire this person as your guide. Now, I'd like to suggest to you, of those three different types of people that could be your guide, that the third person is like Jesus. He's somebody that knows the spiritual world really well. He's been tromping around in it since eternity, and he in part came to us so that we can have a reliable path into that place of the spiritual world. That's why I promote the Christian worldview as a way to have spiritual health. Now, you may not agree with these analogies or these conclusions, but at least I want you to understand why I've reached these conclusions. It's not because of some authoritative teaching. It's because of a personal encounter, several personal encounters that proved to me that I needed a guide like that I would get lost and definitely get myself into some bad trouble if I didn't have a guide like Jesus. So that's why I promote a Christian worldview for any of the pages that I'm putting any material on, because I think that Jesus is really the only reliable guide in the spiritual world. And so I put my complete trust in him for that. I encourage you to do the same if you haven't decided yet where you're trying to go. And if you have decided, I encourage you to take a second look. So I wish you well. God bless, and have a great day.